We've had good times this week, but just knowing that we rest in the sovereignty of our King is what allows that week to go through. No matter if you're having a rough one or if you're having a great one, the sovereignty of our King is what allows us to get there. But I have a question for you, and I don't know if you're like me. I know that I like to ask questions. I like to get to know people. I like to find things out. My own nephew, he played baseball and in minor leagues, and he got pulled down to South America during the off season to play baseball, and there was some sort of a civil unrest, a revolt, and we had to figure out how to smuggle that kid out of South America because his life was in jeopardy. He was getting ready to pitch in a championship game. He had to miss that game because we had to get him out. And so at a time to where we were preparing for his grandmother, my wife's stepmom's funeral, I pulled him into the church quietly and I said, "Tell me everything. What did you go through?" And I just asked question after question. I love to ask questions, not because I'm invasive, but because I like to learn. I want to know what you were going through in these times. But I have a question that I want to reach out to you guys. I want to ask you a simple question, and it's an easy question, and that question is, do you have questions? Do you have questions? Right? We live in a world to where sometimes we're just not understanding something. And if you have a question that has gone unanswered in your life, how did that affect you? Like have you had a question that's been ringing in your heart for 10 years, maybe 3 days? And how is it affecting you to not know the answer? I'm going to give you a very minute analogy. It means absolutely nothing, but I'll just tell you how it strikes me. If I'm watching a movie and I see a character and I'm like, who is that? I cannot even enjoy the rest of the movie until I figure out what that character has played in. And I will literally look it up. In the movie theater, you're not allowed to get your phone out. I get my phone out and I look it up and I lean over to my wife and be like, oh, he played in whatever. And she's like, I could care less, right? But it's like when questions sit in me, I am uneasy until I get the answer. And so I want to, as the pastor of the church, I want to tell you, if you have some sort of a question and you want to, and need an answer, 1, I want to answer it. 2, don't get mad if I don't answer it right now, because I don't want to come across like I know everything and I don't want to be wrong. I want to research. But if you have a question, feel free to reach out. I would love to sit and talk with you about that. But we're going to enter into this series for the next couple of weeks called The Big Questions. And the hope is that we'll all come to accept overall this 4-week theme of our biggest questions deserve better answers. Now, I know you guys as parents probably never ever did this, but our parents did. Whenever we would ask something, the answer was always because I said so, right? We never did that. But as a kid, I felt like I deserved a better answer. Sometimes, as a follower of Jesus, even though I claim him as my king, I want a better answer. And so I reach out and I study and I pray and I go to wise people, wise counsel. And I think about it, no matter how old we are, we never truly outgrow the need to ask questions. But now we are gifted, we are blessed, we have this amazing thing we put in our pockets where we can pull that thing out in the middle of a movie and ask a question, right? And I started thinking about some of the questions that's probably been asked to Google over the years because even 5-year-old kids know how to pull Google out now, right? Probably questions like, can you put the dog in the washing machine, right? I'm sure Tucker's been wondering that himself. He's going to Google that soon, right? Questions, though, like how old a certain person is, things like how to spell certain words, or just last night I saw somebody throw their phone in disgust. I'm not going to say my wife's name, but I saw somebody throw their phone in disgust because she was looking up the price of an item that she needed to purchase for our home. And she didn't like the price, and so the phone went flying. It was only a foot or so, and it landed on the bed. Look, she's so sweet, and everybody's like, oh man, she's mean as can be, right? Here's the thing about Google. We really can't Google every question we have, but maybe we can. But the problem is with Google is we can ask it to give us the answers we want. And I want to tell you what I mean by that. I Googled, for the sake of argument, you're going to love this, is coffee good for you? Is coffee good for you? The answer, right, the very top answer was 10 proven health benefits of coffee. And then a list of wonderful things that coffee did. You can just click on item after item about how great it is. And then, is coffee bad for you? The health risk of drinking coffee. Over, and then all these subsequent articles. So I could get the answer that I wanted. Is it good for me because I want to drink it? Well, here's all the good stuff. Do I not want to drink it because I hate it? Here's all the bad things that I get to tell people. Don't drink coffee because this is what it does to you, right? We can Google any question, and we can get any answer we want to, and we can get the one we want. That's just a random example, but I hope you get my point. We're wired to look for answers, and usually the topics of our biggest questions are way more intense than coffee, or at least I hope they are. We may wonder things like, why am I here? Who are my people? What am I supposed to do with my life? How do I invest my money to make it last? Hunting for answers to questions like this can get very, very complicated in our lives. And that's why for the next few weeks we're going to spend time discussing big questions and how we can get them answered without having to write to our congressman. By the way, they're not going to answer them for us anyway. The goal is, by the end of the series, we'll not only become more comfortable asking questions, which I hope that that's a big thing, that we become more comfortable asking questions, but we'll also grow closer to other people who we can ask those questions with. As a youth pastor for a long time, right, trying to get a teenager to ask questions about the Bible seems like it's pulling teeth. But I'll be honest with you, it's way more easier to have them asking questions of their leaders and things like that than it is grown adults. Because I think grown adults have this moment of pride, like, I'm in my whatevers, 30s, 40s, 50s. I don't want anybody to think that I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not going to ask that question. And we get a little embarrassed or whatever. But I want to make sure that we are bringing forward a group of people, a church that says, I don't care what your question is. I don't care how bad you think it is. If it's on your heart, we need to answer it. And I'm not just talking about from up here in the pulpit, I'm talking about from the church. The church itself, it doesn't even matter if it's Macedonia, but the church, right? So to start off, we're going to ask a somewhat churchy question this morning. I want to ask it out loud. And maybe you've wondered this before, maybe you haven't. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Some people would say that our answer to this question changes everything about our lives. And if it's true, then yes, this is a big question. But there are some that would go straight to Google and ask that question. What does it mean to follow Jesus? And let me just tell you, I did it. I'm not going to type this in my notes and not go do it. So I type it in. What does it mean to follow Jesus? And I got to tell you, I loved the answers. I did not love the answers. To follow Jesus means you need to pray this much in a week. To follow Jesus means you got to dress like this. This is what the people are saying. To follow Jesus, you've got to go to church this amount of hours per week. To follow Jesus, you need to listen to this kind of music all the time. And I just thought to myself, those answers are so shallow, written by shallow people, that really to follow Jesus is nothing. It isn't. It's not a doggone thing to me. In fact, it came to me like just a bunch of rules. It's a bunch of rules. What does it mean to follow Jesus? If that question can change everything for us, then why are the answers so shallow? That's why Google doesn't work sometimes, right? In fact, we aren't even sure that God really does much for our lives if we follow those answers. I'm not even really sure that God does much for us other than make our social media look good and hang out way out on the wings just in case we need him. Because that's what he's been relegated to by the Google search. Not by my heart search, not by my biblical search, not by anything, but other than the Google search, he just hangs out there and does nothing unless I kind of need him. For a lot of people, that's exactly what it is. He's just a place to go hang out with for a few hours on a Sunday morning and then spend the rest of our hours doing whatever we want the rest of the week. In other words, if you follow Jesus, it doesn't really seem like it does anything for your life. Now, I'm waiting for the lightning to come flying through the roof and strike me, but the lightning was flying last night because I don't believe any of that. But I'm telling you, that's the impersonation I get from Google search. So see, people have been asking what it means to follow Jesus for a long time. And we're going to turn to our text this morning, Matthew 4:18 through 20. People have been asking for a long time what it means, and for thousands of years, when Jesus first showed up in the Gospels, and the Gospels is what we call those 4 books that really tell us about the story of Jesus. Gospel meaning good news, and here we're going to give a quick insider look about what it means to follow Jesus. Matthew 4:18 through 20. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." Father God, I love your word. I love the gospel. I love the good news. I love how you worked in here. Lord, this is such a simple moment here in the eyes of what had happened at that time. But may we look at it for what it truly is. You called your first disciples and began the greatest Christian revolution ever. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Now, back in this time period, Jesus obviously called these 12 disciples, but before that, even religious leaders in the synagogues and in the temples had disciples. As a matter of fact, those disciples found their identity in the person that they were following. They were learning from them, they were taking tests, they were learning the scriptures, they were going through the scrolls, and they were a disciple of that person. If we were to just modernize it to this very moment right now, because I'm the pastor of the church, you would be known as Jackson, disciple of Brian. Now, again, the humble person that I am, I love the sound of that, right? But it's meaningless to me. Truly it is. Right? But in that moment, in those times, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance by the religious leader that you got to be a disciple of, and it played into your identity. But here we find that Jesus is changing the way we're going to do things a little bit. I got to just wondering about like Peter and Andrew. They knew about disciples. They knew about the disciples at the time, and they knew how they were living. What was going through their mind? They're sitting there fishing, and some dude comes walking along like, "Hey, throw your nets down and come fish with, I'm going to teach you how to fish for people." He doesn't even have any crew following him yet, and we're going to join him. We're going to be the first ones to be a part of this thing. They didn't know what we know, right? This is all happening real time to them. They're not studying back and seeing. This is happening real time. I'm sure they had questions, like, where are we going to go? What is this dude's name? How long are we going to be gone? And all he said basically was, "Follow me and watch the way I live my life." I love this. Watch how I do things, and then go and do the exact same thing. You're going to have doubts along the way, but watch how I do things and do the same. When you do that, you know what's going to happen? Instead of being a people who will pull fish out of water, you're going to spend your time inviting humans to know God better and be who God has made them to be. I love that. I fell kind of in my seat when that hit me. God just wants us to be who he meant us to be. And we need those disciples to go and fish us out. And we need to be the ones to go and fish out more for those people so they can be who God meant them to be. Jesus is saying, "I'm going to bring out of you a new way of living and being in the world." Now, I wonder, what Jesus offered was enough to inspire those 2 guys. I have no clue how they got bought into that with just a simple statement, "Come and I'll show you how to be fishers of men." But they bought into it. They left their fishing nets, their careers, their identities, and their community, and they followed Jesus. And a bunch of other women and men began to follow them as well. But I just want to point out that we don't read something, and again, I want to speak where the Bible speaks, and I want to be silent where the Bible is silent. But we don't read anywhere to where Jesus said, "Before you follow me, before you become my disciple, I just need to know, have you passed a Bible test yet?" He didn't go out and ask all their friends about him and say, do you think he's a moral character and deserves to follow me and be a part of what I got going on here? He didn't say, are you religious? He didn't do any of those things. He just said, follow me, and I'm going to make you fishers of men. I'm going to show you a new way to fish. And the other thing he didn't tell them is, you're going to be better than everybody else. Friends, I've not here, but I've seen far too much of it to where sometimes we as Christians look down upon other people that are not Christians and we think we're better than them. And we're not. Jesus didn't give his blood and his body so that we could live. He did it for everybody, each and every person out there. Jesus simply invited them to follow in his footsteps, do as he did, talking as he talked, and most importantly, loving as he loved. Jesus invited them to go where he went so they could be more like him. Back to this theme that I kind of have going on in my heart. They were learning from Jesus to live like Jesus. The thing is, when they left their nets, they left their friends and their way of doing life, they were probably filled with a ton of questions. I would be. I know that I would be. Where are we going? How's this going to turn out? For those of us who are familiar with the life of Jesus, it can be easy to forget, again, that when he started out, no one knew the story. No one knew how it would unfold. No one knew that they would wind up on a cross at Golgotha. Nobody knew that that was going to be the way it turned out. They just thought they were following some dude who was going to teach, and they were going to learn to teach like him. They had no clue what was coming. To them, Jesus was just another interesting religious teacher. We fast forward 3 years. Throughout their time together, these disciples got to see him. All the things we've been talking about lately: walk on water, heal people, feed the thousands, raise the dead, heal the sick. He got to witness, they got to witness all of that. And they would hear him speak and watch him do something that no religious leader could do: forgive sins. They would see him arrested, sentenced to death as an innocent person, and not even put up a fight. And finally, after 3 days of being dead and buried, which AKA means fighting a great fight for 3 days, they see him alive again, things that they could have never imagined. But what's crazy is after Jesus had ascended into heaven, what did their lives look like? They didn't stop following like, oh, he's gone. He's our religious leader. He's gone. They realized that he was teaching them more than just to be his followers. He was teaching them to go and do as he had been doing. So we look at some of the things that happened after Jesus had ascended. Peter eventually becomes the first leader of the church, speaks the first Christian message. He preaches that. Except for John, every one of those, and Judas, every one of those disciples died defending their love and faith in Jesus and what he represented. Thousands of years later, we still look back at their stories, their teachings. We learn from them, and some of us have named our kids after somebody in that original 12. Funny thing is, I've never really met a kid named Judas. Like, everybody stays away from that one. I don't know why. We know why. See, when Jesus asked them to follow, they had no idea what they would do or who they would become. But God knew. And I say this because God had a life in mind for them that was bigger than the life that they were currently living. And I don't care what we're doing in our lives, how great we're living, God's plan for us is way greater than what we're doing. Jesus had more in mind for who they'd become and more in mind for their relationships that they would have. He had more in mind for how much they would matter in this world. Their biggest life questions found answers bigger and better than they would have ever dreamed of from those boats throwing those nets. And I just feel this. Jesus had more in mind for their lives in the areas that mattered most. If we were able to do the things we're not able to do, talk to Andrew and Peter and those other disciples and ask them, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does that mean? At the beginning, they wouldn't have known. We're just going to do what he does. But they knew enough to take one step, that first step. They knew that they didn't have to have everything figured out on day one. They didn't have to pass an entrance exam or anything like that. They just had to commit. One day, one step. Following Jesus as his and his example. In doing that, they began to live out what following Jesus meant, and as a result, they found more purpose, they found more direction, they found better relationships, they had more joy, they had more peace, they found something worth giving their lives to, and they found answers to what they were looking for, and we can too. We can totally do that. Think of it this way. When you really understand who Jesus is, it changes everything. The hardest moments we have to live for, it changes those moments. Following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, because if Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most, then following him will lead to clarity in those areas. I struggle sometimes, and I'm sure that I'm not alone. Jesus, why? Jesus, why? Jesus, why? I have many whys to ask my Jesus. The problem is, as a follower, I need to seek clarity in him so I can understand. I hate it when, I don't hate it, but something strikes me sometimes as I'm preaching. It's not in my notes, and I wrestled with God one time. I'm going to tell you this. I cussed him. I was angry with him. I was mad at him. I stood in the middle of a field in full uniform and told him exactly what I thought about him. In that moment, I was angry. A car had crashed. It was a mom and two kids, and the two kids were fine, and mom didn't make it. Why, God? Why would you do this? I don't care to tell you the words I said, but I will say this, that in prayer and contemplation and seeking things out, tests came back way faster in the justice system than they usually do. That mom was so high, and this is not speaking to anybody in the room, this is speaking to me, that those two little ones were better off without her in that situation. That's a singular situation that I'm pointing out the way God worked in me in that day. That does not answer every question we have about why a parent would pass away or anything like that. But I'm just saying in that moment, these results came back so quickly in the clarity, and I realized because those two little kids needed a better parent in their life. And this mom, this one person, wasn't willing to be the better parent. For the disciples, following Jesus was an adventure. I can't imagine that adventure. Constantly walking, go do this, go do that. Let's feed all these people, all this fun stuff. Jesus changed their lives in the best way possible. I firmly believe that. He taught them so many things about life, even with their behavior. But more than that, Jesus loved them, and he served them. To them, following Jesus wasn't about religion. It wasn't about a bunch of rules. It wasn't about social media appearances. It wasn't about how we look in our social groups when we're sitting at dinner or anything like that. None of that mattered. It was about loving people, being more fully human in our moment as our King became fully human and showed us how to deeper love. And so what about us? What about Macedonia? What about the people that are sitting here today? What is that? We couldn't be physically present when Jesus was there teaching, but what do we learn today, and how do we take this moment and push forward in our lives? And I got to tell you, I'm just really spun up right now, so if I'm a little louder than usual, I'm sorry. But I just got a couple things that I want to encourage you to do. One, start reimagining what following Jesus looks like. Let's get rid of the rules. Consider asking yourself a few things. Has my view of following Jesus become too small? Have I made it about rules? Have I reduced it to a bunch of do's and don'ts? And what if it's bigger than that? What if it's an adventure that like the apostles had? What if it's life-changing? What if it's a friendship that I've always wanted? If you're going to be doing a day away soon with God and you want those questions, text me, email me, I'll get them to you. I got to tell you about a rule that I follow. It's a personal rule. Unless it's a VBS or something like that, I will never wear shorts on the stage. I won't. I love to wear shorts every day of my life, but I can't seem to do it here on the stage. I feel like I owe my God more than that. I've worn shorts to church twice in my life. Once was just after surgery out in California. I wanted to be in church, but I was just uncomfortable, so I wore shorts. And the other time was right down here at White Oak Christian Church. And I wore shorts because we were having a youth event immediately after church, and I didn't want to go change, so I just wore shorts and a t-shirt. That is the uniform of the youth pastor, sorry. And, oh, by the way, kicking shoes. Those fly shoes. But during the first service, the person doing the greeting, the kids pastor, sprained her ankle while stepping up on stage, to the point where we had to help her off stage in the middle of service. She looked at me and said, Brian, can you do greeting during second service? And the idea was, yes, I want to serve my king. I want to help you. You're not feeling great. Absolutely. So I get up there during second service. I do the greeting. I do all the fun stuff. I have all these stage responsibilities. And after service was over, somebody caught me in the hall and put their finger right in my face and said, how dare you wear shorts on the stage? And I explained, well, so-and-so. And by the way, this wasn't a staff member. It was a person here, right? I said, so-and-so sprained their ankle. It wasn't even planned. I wasn't supposed to be up there. I would have never chose to wear shorts on the stage. Oh, I mean, there was anger in their heart. And I looked at him. I said, I just love the fact, and by the way, I'm sarcastic sometimes. I love the fact that you have rules about how we're supposed to serve. Did you check with Jesus on that one? That got me in trouble when I said that. They went up. I came back down. But I'm just saying. The idea was somebody got hurt, I stepped in wearing shorts, and somebody placed a rule on me. And that's a rule that I live by myself. I would never wear shorts up here unless it was like a VBS or something. Step number 2, take a step. Follow the example of Andrew and Peter. They simply took a step to follow Jesus. They left their nets and followed this dude that just said, follow me and I'll show you how to fish for people. He didn't have a spreadsheet, he didn't have anything. Follow me. And something drew them. We have to take that step. What does that look like here? Maybe, you got to start to be honest with God and open up about some questions that you have. Maybe it would mean you have a conversation with myself or one of the elders. Maybe it's looking across the aisle and saying, hey, Roy, I got a question. What do you think about this? We're a good group of people, and we can trust each other to ask our hardest questions. Maybe taking that step means showing up more consistently with people that you trust. Maybe it would, cost you a little something in your personal lives because people are going to be like, why are you always hanging out at the church or whatever? But it'll be worth it. Maybe it means joining a church. Maybe that's your next step, baptism. If you haven't been baptized and you've been wondering, what's my next step? I'm telling you, that is the most obedient step we have after you accept Jesus, is to be baptized. The last thing is in your prayers and your alone time, ask yourself these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? And can I make a difference? Because I'm telling you, Andrew and Peter didn't ask themselves those questions that morning. But they did make a difference. They were fishers, and they were the low of the low. They were people that were being ignored by all the religious leaders and ultimately became 2 of the 11 most famous people that are not God in the entire world. Following Jesus can help us as we learn to answer these questions. Jesus isn't just a separate category in our lives, kind of hanging out there in the distance. We drag him in when we need him. He's a big part of us. He's a part of figuring all of this stuff out. Back into week 1 of picnics, we need to use Jesus in the process to figure out, who am I, where do I fit in, and can I make a difference? Making sure we add him to our equations. So spend some time thinking about those questions. Again, Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. And imagine if we could really understand fully. What if we could, see that following Jesus is life-changing? What if we quit seeing it as a list of religious rules and start seeing it more than that? And if we trusted following Jesus, that's going to answer our bigger questions. So as we head out today, I just want to invite you folks to think about what's next for you. What's your next step in following Jesus? Because Andrew and Peter didn't understand what their next step was, but it was way more than they could have ever imagined, and I'm confident it'll be more for us. Doesn't matter if we've had a relationship with Jesus for 40 years or 4 minutes. Your next step following him is going to be amazing. I guarantee it. Let's pray. Heavenly God, you make nothing easy, Father. Following you is adventurous, it is fun, but it is hard. But Lord, it is the road we need to be on. Especially, well, at all times, not even especially in these times, but at all times, God. Your sovereignty is just hanging over us and looming there, and there are people out there that would choose not to follow you, and they just have no clue what they're missing. Lord, may we be the light. May Macedonia Christian Church be the light of those that are looking and searching for you. May we be the disciple of Jesus, as we're supposed to be. May we learn from you to live like you, to love like you, to teach like you, to be compassionate like you, to do all the things that you do and less the things that we want to do. May we remember that as we prepare ourselves. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
We are going to stand and sing page 455. In my heart, there rings a melody.
I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There was a sweeter melody. Jesus' melody of love. In my heart there rings a melody.
There rings a
Melody where the heavens harmony. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody of love. Of the Christ who died on Calvary, for he washed my sins away. He left within my heart a melody, and I know it's there to stay. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody, there heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love. In my endless theme and glory, with the angels I will sing. Will be the song with glorious harmony, when the counts of heaven ring. In my heart there rings a melody, rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody, there rings a melody of love.
That song reminds me of Grandma Highland. Anybody can remember her singing that? Oh my gosh. Oh, I love it.
Friends, as we go this week, I want to encourage you to live like Jesus lived. Follow that example. I don't want to read from a book right now. I just want to say, with all the craziness that's going on, it's so easy to have a short temper, to speak our piece without thinking, to just shoot off and say things that maybe we may regret, may not regret. But as we do go, let's try to be more like Jesus in these moments and offer love and compassion and grace, even when we know that they don't deserve it, because I don't deserve grace and love and compassion, but I got it. Bless you all, friends. Have a great week.